At 11:42 p.m., I saw a flashlight beam cut through the dust of the hallway. The problem was, I was the only person with a key to this entire building, and I hadn't turned my flashlight on yet. I stood there in the absolute pitch black, frozen, feeling the cold air of the concrete floor seep through my boots. Why was someone else in a condemned chemical warehouse in the middle of a Tuesday night? And how had they been following me for 3 floors without making a single sound? My name is Mark. I'm 34, and at the time this happened, I was working as a freelance industrial surveyor. Basically, insurance companies pay me to go into abandoned or aging facilities, take high-resolution photos, and document structural integrity before they decide to renovate or demolish. It's a lonely job, usually boring, and mostly involves me dodging rusted rebar and pigeon droppings. I'm used to empty spaces. I actually prefer them. People are complicated. Empty buildings are just physics and silence. This specific job was in a place we called the Red Warehouse because of the oxidized brickwork on the exterior. It was a massive 6-story structure on the edge of an old industrial park that the city had basically forgotten. It had been empty since the late 90s. No power, no water, and the nearest working street lamp was about 2 blocks away. I was alone because my assistant had called out with the flu, and I had a deadline to meet by Wednesday morning. I didn't mind. I had my gear, my heavy-duty work boots, and a flashlight that could practically cut through steel. I arrived around 9 p.m. The sun had just gone down, leaving that weird purple bruise on the horizon. I let myself in through the heavy iron side door, locked it behind me. That's a habit I have, and started on the ground floor. For the first 2 hours, it was standard procedure. I checked the load-bearing columns, took photos of some suspicious-looking cracks in the foundation, and noted the water damage in the basement. The first time I felt something was wrong was around 11:15 p.m. I was on the 3rd floor, which used to be the main storage area for the chemical vats. It was a huge, open floor plan with dozens of massive rusted tanks that looked like sleeping giants in the dark. I was standing near the center of the room, adjusting my tripod, when I heard a distinct tink. It sounded like a small pebble hitting metal. I stopped moving. In a building that big and that old, there are always noises. Settling concrete, wind through broken window panes, the occasional rat. But this was sharp. It was intentional. I scanned the room with my light. The beam bounced off the rusted vats, creating long, distorted shadows that danced across the ceiling. Nothing. I checked the floor near me. No pebble. I told myself to relax. I figured a piece of rust had just finally given up its grip on a pipe and fallen. I finished my photos and headed toward the freight elevator, which didn't work, obviously, so I had to use the concrete stairs right next to it. As I climbed to the 4th floor, I noticed something on the steps. The stairs were covered in a thick layer of gray dust that had accumulated over 25 years. My footprints were clear and deep. But right next to my footprints, near the edge of the step, there was a smudge. It wasn't a full footprint. It looked like someone had taken a damp cloth and wiped a small circle clean. Just one circle on every 3rd step. I stopped. I crouched down to look at it. The dust was gone in those spots, leaving the bare, dark concrete showing through. It was fresh. If it had been old, more dust would have settled in the circles. My heart gave a little thump. I looked up the stairwell, shining my light into the gap between the railings. The beam just faded into the darkness of the upper floors. "Hello," I called out. The sound of my own voice echoed up the shaft, bouncing off the concrete walls until it turned into a distorted mumble. No one answered. I stood there for a minute, listening. Nothing but the sound of my own breathing, which was getting a little faster than I liked. I decided that someone, maybe a squatter, had been here recently, and I just needed to finish up and get out. I didn't want a confrontation. I reached the 4th floor. This level was different. It was filled with small wooden crates and old office partitions. It was a maze. I started my sweep, but I found myself looking over my shoulder every few seconds. You know that feeling when the hair on the back of your neck stands up, like someone is pointing a finger at the base of your skull? That was me. I was walking down a narrow aisle between the office partitions when I saw it. About 50 feet ahead of me, a shadow moved. It wasn't a trick of my light, because I was holding my flashlight steady. Something had passed between 2 partitions, crossing the aisle. It was quick, low to the ground, and completely silent. I clicked my flashlight off. That was my first mistake, or maybe my best instinct. I don't know. I just wanted to be invisible. I held my breath, the darkness pressing in on me like a physical weight. My eyes started to adjust, but there was almost no ambient light. The windows were boarded up with plywood. And that's when it happened. From the far end of the floor, near the stairs I had just climbed, a thin, weak beam of light cut through the air. It wasn't a powerful LED like mine. It was dim, yellowish, like an old incandescent bulb that was running out of juice. The light wasn't searching the room. It was pointed at the floor. It was following the trail of my footprints in the dust. I felt a cold surge of adrenaline. Someone was tracking me. They weren't looking for a place to sleep. They weren't looking for copper wire to steal. They were following my exact path, step by step. I started to move, as quietly as I could, toward the back of the floor where the fire escape was supposed to be. I knew this layout from the blueprints. If I could get to the rear exit, I could slide down the ladder and run to my truck. I kept my light off, feeling my way along the partitions with my left hand. Every time I moved, I felt like I was making enough noise to wake the dead, but the person with the yellow light didn't speed up. They just kept that slow, methodical pace. I reached the back wall. My hand found the heavy metal handle of the fire exit. I pulled. It didn't budge. I felt the panic start to rise in my throat. I pulled harder, bracing my feet against the floor. The door was rusted shut or chained from the outside. I risked a look back toward the center of the room. The yellow light was closer now. It was maybe 30 feet away, and then the light went out. Now we were both in the dark. I stood there, pressed against the cold metal door, straining to hear anything. A footstep, a rustle of clothing, a breath. The silence was so heavy it felt like my ears were ringing. Click. The yellow light came back on, but it wasn't 30 feet away anymore. It was 10 feet away. It was pointed directly at the spot where I had been standing 30 seconds ago. The person holding it was standing perfectly still. They weren't moving their head. They were just waiting. I realized then that they weren't tracking me by sight. They were listening. Every time I moved, they moved. When I stopped, they stopped. I decided I had to make a break for the front stairs. It was the only way out I knew for sure was open. I took a deep breath, gripped my heavy flashlight like a club, and bolted. I didn't care about being quiet anymore. I ran as hard as I could, my boots slamming against the floor. I heard the other person start to run too. Their footsteps were weird, light and tapping, like they were running on their toes. I reached the stairwell and threw myself down the steps, taking them 3 at a time. I got to the 3rd floor, then the 2nd. I could hear them right behind me, just 1 flight up. They were fast, way faster than I was. I reached the ground floor and sprinted toward the side door where I had entered. I reached into my pocket for the keys. They weren't there. I stopped dead in my tracks, my chest heaving. I patted my pockets frantically. Nothing. I must have dropped them when I was crouched down looking at those smudges on the 3rd floor. I looked back at the stairs. The yellow light was at the top of the ground floor flight. It started coming down step by step, very slowly. I backed away from the door, my mind racing. The ground floor was a loading dock area. There were large roll-up doors, but they were all locked with heavy internal bolts. There was a small supervisor's office near the back. I ran for it, ducking inside and closing the wooden door as softly as possible. The office had a small window that looked out onto the loading dock. I crouched under the desk, my heart hammering so hard I thought it would crack a rib. Through the window, I watched the yellow light enter the room. The person holding the light finally came into view. It wasn't a squatter. It was a man wearing a very clean, very expensive-looking suit. But the suit didn't fit right. It was draped over him like he was a skeleton, the shoulders hanging low. He wasn't holding the flashlight in his hand. He had it taped to the side of his head with silver duct tape. He was carrying a long, thin piece of metal, a sharpened rebar maybe. He walked to the center of the loading dock and stopped. He began to turn his head in a slow, mechanical circle, the yellow light sweeping across the room. He stopped when the light hit the office door. I squeezed my eyes shut. Please don't come in here. Please don't come in here. I heard his footsteps. Tap, tap, tap. He was walking toward the office. He reached the door. I heard his hand touch the wood. It was a scratching sound, like he was trying to feel the grain of the door. Then he spoke. It wasn't a voice. It was a whistle. A long, low, rising whistle, like someone calling a dog. He did it 3 times. Then he just stood there. For 10 minutes, he didn't move. I could see the yellow glow through the cracks in the office door. I was paralyzed. I knew if I moved, he'd hear me. If I screamed, no one would hear me. I was in a concrete tomb with a man who taped lights to his head. After what felt like an eternity, the yellow light faded. I heard him walk away, not back toward the stairs, but toward the back of the warehouse, into the darkness of the shipping bays. I waited. I didn't move for an hour. I sat under that desk until my legs went numb. I watched the moonlight crawl across the floor through a high clear-story window. When I was sure he was gone, or at least far enough away, I crawled out. I knew I couldn't use the side door. I didn't have the keys. I had to find another way out. I remembered the basement. There was an old coal chute that led to a grate in the sidewalk. It was small, but I was thin enough. I moved through the shadows, avoiding the center of the room. I reached the basement stairs and descended into the damp, smelling air. I found the coal chute. It was a metal tunnel angled upward. I climbed into it, my hands slipping on the oily residue. I pushed against the grate at the top. It was stuck. I pushed with everything I had, my face pressed against the cold iron bars. I could see the street outside. I could see the distant, flickering street lamp. Freedom was 6 inches away. I heard a sound behind me, at the bottom of the coal chute. Tap, tap. I didn't look back. I put my shoulder against the grate and gave a desperate, agonizing shove. The rusted bolt snapped, and the grate flew open, clattering onto the sidewalk. I scrambled out, skinning my elbows and knees on the concrete. I didn't look back until I was a block away, standing under the street lamp. I looked back at the red warehouse. In a high window on the 4th floor, I saw the yellow light. It was moving back and forth very fast, like a frantic signal. I ran to the nearest gas station and called the police. They arrived about 20 minutes later. I gave them the spare key the insurance company had provided. They searched the building for 3 hours. They found my keys on the 3rd floor, right where I thought I'd dropped them. But they didn't find the man. What they did find, however, was in the basement, right near the bottom of the coal chute where I had escaped. They found a small pile of things. My driver's license, which must have fallen out of my pocket earlier, a lock of hair that wasn't mine, and a series of Polaroid photos. The police showed them to me. They were all taken from inside the red warehouse, and they were all of me. Some were from the first hour of my job, taken from high up in the rafters. Some were of me taking photos of the chemical vats. The last one was a photo of the back of my head as I was standing at the 4th floor fire exit, trying to pull it open. The man hadn't just been following me that night. He had been in that warehouse with me for weeks. He had set up nests in the crawl spaces. He had been watching me every time I had come to do a preliminary site visit in the weeks leading up to the final survey. The police never caught him. They found his suit in a dumpster 3 blocks away 2 days later. Inside the pocket of the suit was a small piece of paper with my home address written on it. I moved that week. I quit the surveying business. I work in an open-plan office now, on the 10th floor of a high-rise with floor-to-ceiling windows and security guards at the front desk. But sometimes, when it's late and the cleaning crew has gone home, I'll be sitting at my desk and I'll hear a sound. Tink, like a pebble hitting a metal trash can. And I'll look at the reflection in the window, and for a split second, I'll see a faint, yellow glow behind me. I don't look back anymore. I just pack my bag, walk to the elevator, and keep my eyes on the floor. Because the thing about being followed is that you never really know when the person behind you has decided they've waited long enough. I live in a building with a 24-hour doorman now. I pay extra for it, a lot extra. Last night, the doorman called my intercom at 3 a.m. He sounded confused. He said there was a man in a very nice suit standing on the sidewalk, just staring up at my window. The doorman asked if I was expecting anyone. I told him no. I told him to call the police. By the time they got there, the man was gone. But on the sidewalk, right where he had been standing, they found a small circle wiped perfectly clean in the city grime. And in the center of that circle was a single, rusted bolt from a coal chute. I'm sitting in my living room right now. All the lights are on. I have a chair pushed against the front door. I just heard a sound from the hallway. A long, low, rising whistle. He's not in the warehouse anymore. He's in the building. And I think he's finally done waiting.